David never believed in love at first sight until that Tuesday afternoon in October. He was sitting in the corner of the university library, struggling with his anthropology assignment about social behavior patterns. The place was packed. With students cramming for midterms, every table was full. People were sharing chairs, and some were even sitting on the floor. That's when she walked in. The entire library seemed to pause. Not completely stop, but there was this weird moment where conversations got quieter and people looked up from their books. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with platinum blonde hair that caught the light in a way that didn't seem quite normal. Her skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow, and when she moved, it was like watching water flow. But here's the strange part. Despite being absolutely stunning, she made people uncomfortable. David watched as students would glance at her, then quickly look away. Some actually got up and moved to different tables. When she walked past, she found an empty table in the center of the library. Within 5 minutes, every single person sitting around her had packed up and left. David counted at least 12 people who suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. She sat there alone, surrounded by empty chairs in the most crowded library on campus. David couldn't stop staring. Not because she was beautiful, though she definitely was. It was something else. The way she held herself, like she was carrying some invisible weight. The way her eyes seemed older than her face. The way she looked around the room like she was studying a foreign species. Over the next few days, David started noticing her everywhere. In the cafeteria, eating alone while other students whispered and pointed. Walking to classes with her head down, books clutched tight to her chest, sitting in the back row of lectures where professors seemed to avoid making eye contact with her. The rumors started almost immediately. Some students said she was from Norway. Others claimed she was from some remote part of Russia. Someone spread a story that she was the daughter of some rich European family who got kicked out for being too weird. Another rumor suggested she was in some kind of witness protection program. But the strangest rumor was the one David heard in his dorm hallway late one night. Two guys were talking in hushed voices about how being near her made them feel sick. Not physically sick, but wrong somehow. Like their brain was telling them to run even though they couldn't explain why. David's roommate, Tyler, was one of the worst gossips on campus. He came back to their room one evening full of stories about the mysterious girl. Dude, you should see what happens in Professor Wilson's European history class, Tyler said, throwing his backpack on his bed. She sits in the front row, right? And Wilson can barely look at her. He keeps stumbling over his words and sweating. Yesterday, he actually stepped backwards when she raised her hand to ask a question. Maybe he's just nervous around pretty girls, David suggested. Tyler shook his head. Nah, man, it's not that. There's something off about her. Like, really off. My girlfriend Jessica was in the bathroom yesterday, and this girl walks in. Jessica said she felt like she was going to throw up just being in the same room. She left without even washing her hands. David found himself defending her, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe people are just being mean because she's different. Different how? She looks perfect. Too perfect. That's the problem. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. David was leaving his social psychology class when he saw a crowd gathered near the student center. At the middle of it all was the mysterious girl, standing perfectly still, while a group of students circled her like she was some kind of exhibit. Just admit it, one of the girls was saying. You're not really a student here, are you? Nobody just shows up out of nowhere looking like that. Yeah, another student chimed in. And why does being around you feel so weird? What's wrong with you? The mysterious girl didn't respond. She just stood there, her pale blue eyes moving from face to face in the crowd. She didn't look scared or angry. She looked sad, deeply, impossibly sad. Maybe she doesn't speak English, someone suggested. With a laugh, I speak English perfectly well, she said, and her voice was like nothing David had ever heard. It had this musical quality, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. I speak 7 languages, actually. This seemed to make the crowd even more agitated. See, that's not normal. Who speaks 7 languages? Someone who's not from around here, another voice added. David watched this beautiful girl stand alone against a crowd of hostile faces, and something inside him snapped. Before he could think about it, he was pushing through the circle of students. Leave her alone, he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. She's not bothering anyone. The crowd turned to look at him like he'd lost his mind. David, dude, don't. Tyler's voice came from somewhere behind him. Just walk away. But David couldn't walk away. He looked at the girl's face and saw something that made his chest tight. Relief, pure, grateful relief that someone had stepped forward. What's your name? He asked her, ignoring the murmurs from the crowd. Lyra, she said simply. Lyra Solberg. I'm David. Want to get some coffee? The crowd started breaking up, muttering things like he's lost it and she's got him under some kind of spell. Tyler shot him a look that clearly said they'd be having a long conversation later. But David didn't care about any of that, because when Lyra smiled at him, really smiled for the first time since he'd been watching her, something extraordinary happened. For just a moment, the whole world felt different, brighter, more alive. I would like that very much, she said. And as they walked away together toward the campus coffee shop, David couldn't shake the feeling that his ordinary life had just taken a turn toward something incredible. He didn't understand why everyone was so afraid of this girl, but he was determined to find out. What he didn't know was that by the end of that coffee date, everything he thought he knew about the world would be turned upside down, and that simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would change both of their lives forever. Because Lyra Solberg wasn't just different, she was something else entirely. And David Martinez was about to discover that sometimes the most beautiful things in the world are also the most dangerous. The coffee shop was nearly empty when David and Lyra walked in. It was one of those small places near campus that usually stayed busy until late evening. But today it felt different. The barista behind the counter, a girl David recognized from his morning psychology class, took one look at Lyra and suddenly found something very interesting to clean at the far end of the counter. "To coffees, please," David called out, but the barista pretended not to hear him. He had to walk over and practically tap the counter to get her attention. "Oh, hey David," she said. But her eyes kept darting to Lyra, who was standing by the window looking out at the campus. "What can I get you?" "Just a regular coffees, black." The barista nodded quickly and started making the drinks. But David noticed her hands were shaking slightly when she handed him the cups. She whispered, "Be careful, okay?" David wanted to ask what she meant, but Lyra had found a table in the corner, away from the few other customers. As they sat down, David noticed something strange. The coffee shop, which had been playing soft background music when they entered, was now completely silent. Even the usual sounds of the espresso machine and blenders had stopped. "So," David said, trying to break the awkward tension, "Norway, right? What's it like there?" Lyra wrapped her pale hands around her coffee cup and looked at him with those incredibly blue eyes. "Norway is beautiful. Very cold, but beautiful. The winters are long, and the summers have light that never ends." Her voice had that same musical quality he'd noticed before. But sitting this close, David could hear something else in it. Loneliness, deep, aching loneliness. "What made you come here?" "To study, I mean." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "I wanted to understand people better, how they live together, how they form groups, how they decide who belongs and who doesn't." "That sounds like anthropology." "That's actually what I'm studying too." For the first time since he met her, Lyra smiled, really smiled, and when she did, something strange happened. The lights in the coffee shop seemed to get brighter, and David felt this warm feeling spread through his chest. "You study human behavior?" she asked. "Then maybe you can help me understand something." Why do people fear what they don't understand? David thought about it. I guess it's instinct. Back when humans lived in caves, anything different or unknown could be dangerous. So we learned to be suspicious of things that seemed out of place. But this isn't the cave times anymore. No. But our brains still work the same way. When people see something that doesn't fit their normal experience, it triggers this ancient warning system. Lyra nodded slowly. That makes sense, I suppose. I don't fit anyone's normal experience. They talked for almost 2 hours. David learned that Lyra knew more about history than most of his professors. She could recite poetry in languages he'd never heard of, and seemed to understand things about human nature that took most people years to figure out. But the more they talked, the more David noticed the strange things, like how she never blinked, as much as normal people, or how she sometimes paused in the middle of sentences, as if she was translating her thoughts from some other language before speaking. And there was the way she looked at everything around her, like she was seeing it all for the first time. Can I ask you something? David said as they were getting ready to leave. Of course. Where did you really come from? I mean, I know you said Norway, but he struggled to find the right words. You seem like you're from somewhere much further away than that. Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and David had the strange feeling she was deciding whether to trust him with something important. Would you believe me if I told you? She finally asked. Try me. But before she could answer, the door of the coffee shop burst open and Tyler walked in with 3 other guys from David's dorm. They looked around, spotted David and Lyra, and came straight over. David, man, we've been looking for you everywhere, Tyler said, but his eyes were fixed on Lyra. We need to talk. I'm kind of in the middle of something here, Tyler. Yeah, we can see that. One of the other guys, Kevin, pulled out his phone. Dude, you need to see this. Someone posted a video of what happened earlier. You're all over social media now. David looked at the phone screen. Sure enough, there was a shaky video of him pushing through the crowd to defend Lyra. The comments below were not kind. People are saying you're under some kind of spell. Tyler continued. That she's got some weird power over guys or something. That's ridiculous, David said. But he noticed Lyra had gone very quiet and was staring down at her hands. Is it? Kevin leaned forward. Mike from the 3rd floor said his roommate tried to ask her out last week. The guy ended up in the hospital with some kind of panic attack. Doctors couldn't figure out what caused it. David looked at Lyra, expecting her to deny it, but she didn't say anything. Look, Tyler said, lowering his voice, we're your friends, okay? We're just looking out for you. There's something not right about her. Everyone can feel it. You don't even know her. David protested. Neither do you. Man, you met her like 3 hours ago. That hit David harder than he expected. Tyler was right. He didn't know anything about Lyra. Not really. But sitting there, looking at her sad, beautiful face, he realized he didn't care. I think you guys should leave, David said quietly. Tyler, exchange looks with the other guys. Fine. But when this goes bad, and it will go bad, don't say we didn't warn you. After they left, the coffee shop felt even quieter than before. Lyra hadn't said a word during the entire confrontation. Is it true? David asked, about the guy in the hospital. Lyra looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. I never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't even know it happened until later. What did happen? I can't explain it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She stood up to leave. Your friends are right, David. You should stay away from me. But as she walked toward the door, David felt something he'd never experienced before. It was like watching the most important thing in his life walk away forever. Lyra, wait, he called out. She stopped but didn't turn around. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care about rumors or hospital visits or weird feelings. You're the most interesting person I've ever met, and I'm not going to let fear keep me from getting to know you better. When she finally turned around, there were tears in her eyes. You don't understand what you're saying. Then help me understand. For a moment, David thought she might actually tell him everything right there. But instead, she just whispered, thank you, and walked out into the evening. David sat alone in the empty coffee shop, staring at the door she'd walked through, knowing that everything in his life had just changed. He didn't understand what was happening to him or why he felt so connected to someone. He barely knew, but he was determined to find out, no matter what the cost might be. David couldn't sleep that night every time he closed his eyes. He saw Lyra's face when she said, "You don't understand what you're saying." There was something in her expression, a mixture of hope and terror that he couldn't get out of his head. The next morning, he decided to do some research. If everyone was so convinced there was something strange about Lyra, maybe he could find some answers. He started with the obvious place, social media and student records, but found almost nothing. Her university profile was basic, just listing her as an exchange student from Norway studying comparative literature. No photos, no social media presence, nothing. That's when David remembered something his favorite professor, Dr. Chen, had said in class about researching unusual social phenomena. Sometimes the answers aren't in what people say, but in the patterns of what they don't say. So David started looking at the patterns. He spent hours in the library, not studying his own assignments, but tracking every story, every rumor, every whispered comment about Lyra. What he found was disturbing. The incidents weren't random. There was the guy who ended up in the hospital with panic attacks. A girl from the art department who said she couldn't paint for 3 days after sitting near Lyra in class because the colors looked wrong. A professor who canceled 2 classes in a row after Lyra asked a question about ancient mythology. But the strangest thing David discovered was in the local newspaper archives. Similar stories had been appearing in this town for decades. Different names, different years, but always the same pattern. A mysterious, beautiful woman would appear. People would react with fear and fascination. And then she would disappear without explanation. 1987. Local woman's unusual beauty sparks concern. 1994. Strange visitor leaves town in mystery. 2003. University students' mysterious departure puzzles classmates. 2011. Unexplained phenomenon surrounds foreign exchange student. The descriptions were always similar: pale skin, unusual grace, an accent that no one could quite identify, and always, people described feeling wrong around them. David printed out every article and spread them across his desk. Tyler walked in and saw the papers everywhere. "Dude, what is this? Research?" David said. Not looking up, Tyler picked up one of the newspaper clippings. "Why are you reading about some random woman from 1987? Because she wasn't random. None of them were." David showed Tyler the pattern he'd discovered. "Look at this. Every 8 to 10 years, someone just like Lyra shows up in this town. Same description, same effects on people, same mysterious disappearance." Tyler sat down on his bed, staring at the papers. "Okay, that's actually pretty weird. But what does it mean?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." David's chance came sooner than expected. The next afternoon, he was walking across campus when he heard shouting from the direction of the student center. A crowd had gathered again, and David's heart sank when he realized Lyra was in the middle of it. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just standing there taking it. She was arguing back. "You want to know what I am," Lyra was saying, her voice carrying that musical quality, but with an edge David had never heard before. "You want to understand why you feel uncomfortable around me." "Yeah," someone in the crowd shouted. "Tell us what you really are." David pushed through the crowd, but stopped when he saw Lyra's face. Her eyes were brighter than usual, almost glowing, and there was something in her expression that made him pause. "You feel afraid because your instincts are correct," Lyra continued. "I'm not like you. I never have been, and I never will be." The crowd went quiet. Even David felt a chill run down his spine. "But that doesn't make me dangerous," Lyra said, her voice getting softer. "It just makes me different." "Different how?" The question came from Dr. Wilson, the European history professor that Tyler had mentioned. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, and David could see his hands shaking. Lyra looked directly at the professor. "You teach about mythology, Dr. Wilson, about stories that people told to explain things they couldn't understand. What if I told you that some of those stories weren't stories at all?" Dr. Wilson took a step backward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the world is much larger and stranger than most people want to believe. And sometimes, things from the larger world end up in the smaller one." The crowd was completely silent now. David could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "That's impossible," someone whispered. Lyra turned toward the voice. Is it? You've all felt it, haven't you? That sense that something about me doesn't fit in your reality. Your minds are trying to protect you by making you afraid, but you can't quite understand why. She was right, and David knew it. He had felt it too. That strange sense that Lyra didn't quite belong in the world he knew. But unlike everyone else, it didn't make him want to run away. It made him want to understand. What are you? David heard himself ask. Lyra's eyes found his in the crowd, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. I'm someone who doesn't belong here, she said simply. Someone who comes from a place where the rules are different. You're crazy, someone in the crowd said, but their voice lacked conviction. Am I? Lyra asked. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them again, something extraordinary happened. Every electronic device in the area started acting up. Cell phones buzzed and flickered. Streetlights began flashing. And the digital display on the student center started showing symbols that definitely weren't English. The crowd stepped back as one. But David found himself moving forward. How did you do that? He asked. I didn't do anything, Lyra said. And David could hear exhaustion in her voice. This is just what happens when someone like me stays in one place too long. The world starts to adjust. Dr. Wilson spoke up from the back of the crowd. In folklore, there are stories about beings who exist between worlds. Travelers who can move between different realities. Folklore, Lyra repeated with a sad smile. Yes, that's what you would call it. The electronics gradually returned to normal, but the crowd remained frozen. David realized that everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move. I should go, Lyra said quietly. I've already stayed too long. No, David said, surprising himself with how firm his voice sounded. Don't go. Lyra looked at him with an expression of complete disbelief. David, you heard what I just said. You saw what just happened. I saw something amazing, David replied. I saw proof that the world is bigger and more wonderful than I ever imagined. The crowd began to disperse, people walking away quickly and whispering among themselves. Within minutes, only David and Lyra remained standing in the courtyard. You're not afraid of me? Lyra asked. David thought about it honestly. I'm terrified, he admitted. But not of you. I'm afraid of going back to my boring, ordinary life and pretending that magic doesn't exist. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the second time since he'd known her, she smiled that brilliant smile that seemed to light up the world around them. You really are different, aren't you? She said. I guess we both are. As they walked away together, David realized that his life had just taken a turn into something completely unknown. He didn't know what Lyra really was or where she came from, but he was determined to find out. What he didn't know was that by choosing to stay with her, he had just set events in motion that would change everything he thought he knew about reality itself. After the incident in the courtyard, everything changed. David's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and even people he barely knew. The video of the electronic disturbance had gone viral on campus social media. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened, but David ignored them all. He had bigger questions that needed answers. He found Lyra sitting alone by the lake at the edge of campus. It was a quiet spot where couples usually went to be alone, but today it was empty except for her. She was throwing small stones into the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. I've been thinking about what you said, David said as he sat down beside her on the grass. Which part? Lyra asked without looking at him. The part about coming from somewhere with different rules. I need to understand what that means. Lyra was quiet for a long time. She picked up another stone and threw it farther than should have been possible for someone her size. It skipped across the water 7 times before disappearing. Do you know what loneliness really is, David? She finally asked. I thought I did. Real loneliness isn't just being alone. It's being the only one of your kind in an entire world. It's knowing that no matter how hard you try, you'll never truly belong anywhere. David felt his chest tighten. Is that what you are? The only one. Not the only one in existence, but the only one here, in this reality, Lyra turned to face him, and David was struck again by how her eyes seemed to hold depths that went on forever. My people. We don't have a name that translates well into your language. We exist in the spaces between worlds, moving from one reality to another. Why? Because we have to. We can't stay in any one place for too long without causing problems. You saw what happened with the electronics. That's nothing compared to what could happen if I stayed much longer. David tried to process what she was telling him. So you're, like, what? An alien? Lyra smiled sadly. Not in the way you're thinking. We're not from another planet. We're from another layer of existence entirely. Think of reality like a book with many pages. Most people live their entire lives on one page. My people move between the pages. That sounds incredible. Why do you seem so sad about it? Because moving between worlds means never having a home, never having friends who really understand you, never having, she trailed off, looking back at the water. Never having what? Love, she whispered. Never having someone who knows who you really are and chooses to stay anyway. David felt something shift in his chest. Is that what you want? Someone to stay? Lyra looked at him with an expression so vulnerable it made his heart race. I've wanted it for longer than you can imagine. But it's impossible. Why? Because eventually, I have to leave. I always have to leave. And the longer I stay, the more dangerous it becomes for everyone around me. David stood up and walked to the edge of the water. He could see his reflection, but somehow Lyra's reflection seemed brighter, more vivid than his own. What kind of dangerous? He asked. The barriers between realities start to weaken. Strange things begin to happen. People have dreams that aren't really dreams. Objects appear that shouldn't exist. Time moves differently in some places. Lyra joined him at the water's edge. Eventually, the two realities start to merge, and that's catastrophic for both. How long do you usually stay in one place? A few months at most. I've already been here longer than I should have. David turned to face her. Why? Why did you stay longer this time? Lyra was quiet for so long that David thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because of you. The words hit David like a physical force. Me? You were the first person in 3 centuries who looked at me and didn't see something to be feared. You saw someone worth helping, someone worth defending. Tears were starting to form in her eyes. Do you have any idea what that meant to me? David felt his own eyes getting wet. Lyra, I know it's selfish. I know I'm putting everyone at risk by staying. But for the first time in my very long life, I felt like maybe I could have something normal, something real. How long have you been alive? David asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Time works differently where I come from. In your terms, I suppose I'm about 800 years old. David sat down heavily on a fallen log. 800 years of loneliness, 800 years of never belonging anywhere. That's why you know so much about history and languages. He said, you were there. I've seen civilizations rise and fall. I've watched the same patterns repeat across dozens of different realities. I've learned languages that no longer exist in this world. And in all that time, no one ever chose me over their fear. Until you? David looked at this extraordinary being sitting beside him. Someone who had lived through centuries of history, who could move between worlds, who possessed abilities he couldn't even imagine. And all she wanted was the same thing everyone wanted, to be accepted for who she really was. The night we had coffee, David said, you asked me why I helped you. You said you might never believe my answer. I remember. Well, now I know the real answer. David took her hand, surprised by how warm it was despite her pale appearance. I helped you because I recognized something in you, the same thing I see in myself every day. What's that? Someone who doesn't quite fit in the world they're living in. Someone who feels like they're different from everyone around them, but doesn't know how to bridge that gap. Lyra squeezed his hand. But you're human, David. You belong here, do. I've spent my whole life studying other people's behavior because I never understood how to fit in. Naturally, I've always felt like I was watching humanity from the outside. trying to figure out the rules that everyone else seems to know instinctively. Lyra stared at him with new understanding. That's why you weren't afraid of me. That's why I was drawn to you. You made me feel less alone in my own strangeness. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the sun begin to set over the lake. David realized this was the first time in his life he felt completely understood by another person. What happens now? He finally asked. I don't know, Lyra admitted. I've never been in this situation before. Well, for what it's worth, I'm not going anywhere. Lyra turned to look at him with an expression of amazement, even knowing what I am. Even knowing the risks, David thought about his boring, predictable life before Lyra arrived. His safe, ordinary future that stretched ahead of him with no surprises. No magic, no wonder, especially knowing what you are, he said. Lyra, you've shown me that the world is so much bigger and more amazing than I ever dreamed. How could I go back to pretending that magic doesn't exist? It won't be easy. The closer we become, the more unstable things will get. Then we'll figure it out together. Lyra smiled through her tears. You have no idea what you're signing up for. Maybe not, but I know what I'm choosing. I'm choosing wonder over safety. I'm choosing love over fear. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, David realized that his ordinary life was officially over. Whatever came next would be extraordinary, dangerous, and completely unknown. But looking at Lyra's face in the starlight, he knew he had made the right choice. 3 weeks later, David's world started falling apart. It began with small things. His alarm clock would randomly change times during the night. His textbooks would sometimes show pages written in languages that didn't exist. His reflection in mirrors occasionally showed him wearing clothes he'd never owned. But it wasn't just David. The entire campus was experiencing what the administration carefully called unusual phenomena. Street lights would flicker in patterns that seemed almost like code. The library computers would sometimes display images of places that looked nothing like Earth. Students reported dreams that felt more real than waking life. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when David woke up to find Tyler packing his bags. I can't take it anymore, man, Tyler said without looking at him. Last night I dreamed I was in some kind of crystal city with 3 moons in the sky. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like I was actually there. Maybe it was just stress. For midterms, David suggested, though he knew it wasn't true. David, my coffee mug turned into some kind of glowing flower yesterday. A flower made of light. Then it turned back into a coffee mug like nothing happened. Tyler shoved another shirt into his suitcase. I'm transferring to state. My parents think I'm having a breakdown, but I know what's really happening. It's her. It's that girl you've been hanging around with. David wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because Tyler was right. Lyra had warned him this would happen, but experiencing it was completely different from understanding it intellectually. Where are you going to go? David asked. My uncle's place in California. Far away from here. Far away from whatever she really is. After Tyler left, David sat alone in his empty dorm room and tried to process what was happening. His phone had been ringing constantly for days. His parents, his sister, his high school friends, all worried about the strange reports they were hearing about his college. But David ignored them all. He had a more important conversation waiting for him. He found Lyra in their usual spot by the lake, but she looked different. Her pale skin seemed almost translucent now, and there was a shimmer around her that hadn't been there before. It's getting worse, isn't it? David said as he sat beside her. Much worse. I can feel the barriers weakening every day. Lyra's voice had that musical quality, but now it sounded like it was coming from very far away. Last night, I saw creatures from my world starting to appear in your dreams. That's never happened before. What does it mean? It means I've stayed too long. Much too long. Lyra turned to face him, and David could see the pain in her eyes. I have to leave, David, tonight. The words hit him like a physical blow. No. Yes, if I don't go now, the damage might become permanent. To realities trying to occupy the same space, it would destroy both worlds. David stood up and paced to the water's edge. There has to be another way. There isn't. I've been consulting with others of my kind through dreams. They're all saying the same thing. I should have left weeks ago. What if I came with you? Lyra's expression became incredibly sad. David, you can't survive in my world. Humans aren't built for travel between realities. It would kill you? Then you stay here. We'll figure out how to fix the barrier problem. I can't. The longer I stay, the worse it gets. Eventually, the instability would spread beyond this town, beyond this state. It could affect your entire reality. David sank down onto the grass, feeling like his heart was being torn apart. So that's it. We just say goodbye and pretend this never happened. I wish there was another choice. They sat in silence for a long time, both of them crying. David had never felt pain like this before. It was like losing part of his soul. I want you to know something, Lyra said eventually. These past months with you have been the happiest of my entire existence. For the first time in 800 years, I felt like I had a home. You do have a home. Here, with me. No, David, my home isn't a place. It's you. It's the way you look at me like I'm something wonderful instead of something terrifying. It's the way you chose to stay when everyone else ran away. David wiped his eyes and looked at her, even with the otherworldly shimmer surrounding her. Even knowing what she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Why did you ask me that first day why I helped you? He asked. Because I needed to understand if your kindness was real or if it was just pity. And what did you decide? I decided that you have the rarest thing in any universe. A heart that's brave enough to love what it doesn't understand. David felt a new wave of tears coming. I love you too. You know, I love everything about you. Your voice, your smile, the way you see the world like it's all brand new. I love how you make me feel like I'm part of something magical. Then you understand why I have to go. Love means protecting the person you care about, even when it breaks your heart. As the sun began to set, reality around them started to shift. More dramatically, the lake seemed to stretch on forever, and David could see strange lights dancing beneath the surface. In the distance, buildings that definitely weren't part of the campus flickered in and out of existence. It's starting, Lyra said. I have to go now, before it's too late. She stood up, and David could see that she was becoming less solid, more like light than flesh. Will I ever see you again? He asked. I don't know. Time works differently in my world. But I promise you this, David Martinez, no matter where I go, no matter how many realities I travel through, I will never forget the human who chose wonder over fear. And I'll never forget the girl who showed me that magic is real. Lyra leaned down and kissed him. Her lips felt like starlight and tasted like honey. When she pulled away, David could barely see her anymore. Thank you, she whispered, for helping me when everyone else turned away. Thank you for showing me what love feels like. Thank you for choosing to stay as long as you could. With that, she stepped backward into the lake. But instead of water, she seemed to step into light itself. The air around her shimmered and twisted, and David caught glimpses of other worlds, other realities, all connected by doorways of pure energy. Goodbye, David. Goodbye, Lyra. And then she was gone. David stood alone by the lake as the strange phenomena gradually faded away. The buildings in the distance disappeared, the lights under the water went out, and everything returned to normal. But David was not the same person who had walked down here an hour ago. He had loved and lost something extraordinary. He had seen proof that the universe was infinite and full of wonders beyond imagination. His phone buzzed with another call from his worried parents, but David didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at the stars and smiled, because now he knew the truth. Magic was real. Love could transcend different realities, and sometimes the most beautiful thing you could do for someone was let them go. 6 months later, David published his first research paper on social responses to the unknown. A year after that, he became the youngest professor in his department. He spent his career studying the spaces between the known and unknown, always hoping that someday, somehow, he might find a way back to that magical time when love made the impossible seem real, and sometimes, late at night when the stars were especially bright, David thought he could see a shimmer in the air that looked almost like a beautiful girl. With pale skin and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries, he never knew for certain if it was really her. But he never stopped believing in magic.